Welcome back, everyone. If you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button and ring the little bell, because trust me, you do not want to miss where this story is going. And if you've been with me since the last series, you already know the drill. Buckle up. Because today, we're asking one of the biggest what-if questions in the entire Naruto universe. What if the dead last of the academy, the loudest, clumsiest, most overlooked kid in Konoha, didn't just become Hokage through raw stubbornness and a fox's chakra? What if he became something else first? Something rarer. Something that hadn't been seen in the land of fire since the days of the first Hokage's own wife. What if Naruto Uzumaki became the greatest Fuinjutsu master since Mito Uzumaki herself? Let's find out how it starts. Let's rewind to the night everything changed. The night of the Forbidden Scroll. The moon hung heavy and orange over Konoha, the kind of low, swollen moon that made the rooftops look like they were dipped in copper. Somewhere in the village, lanterns still burned in a few windows, but most of the streets were dark, quiet, the way they always were a little past midnight. And through that darkness ran a 12-year-old boy with a scroll almost as big as he was strapped to his back. Naruto Uzumaki's lungs burned. His legs burned. Everything burned, honestly, but he didn't stop running, because Mizuki-sensei's voice was still echoing in his head, the promise that if he learned one technique from this scroll and brought it back, he'd pass. He'd finally pass. You already know what happens here if you've watched the original story. You know about Mizuki's betrayal. You know about the shadow clone jutsu. You know Iruka takes a blow meant for his student and calls him one of his own, headband and all. But you don't know about the scroll beneath the scroll. Nobody does. Not yet. Naruto skidded to a stop in a small clearing deep in the forest, chest heaving, and dropped to his knees, unraveling the giant scroll across the grass. His hands were shaking with excitement more than fear. Okay, he muttered to himself, scanning the dense, cramped handwriting. Okay, gotta learn something fast, something cool, something that'll make Iruka-sensei's jaw drop. His eyes caught on a technique near the top. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. He didn't know it yet, but this single choice, this single scroll entry, was about to reshape the next decade of his life. He read it twice, chakra crackling faintly around his hands as he tried to parse the seals required. It wasn't easy. It wasn't supposed to be easy. It was an A-rank technique, forbidden for a reason, but something about it clicked for Naruto in a way the Academy clone jutsu never had. Maybe it was the raw amount of chakra he had to throw at it instead of finesse. Maybe it was just stubbornness. Whatever it was, an hour later, when Mizuki found him in that clearing with a wild, triumphant grin on his face, Naruto had it down. Now you know what happens next. Iruka arrives. Mizuki reveals the truth about the 9 tails sealed inside Naruto, hoping to break him, hoping to turn him into a weapon of vengeance. Naruto refuses. Iruka takes a giant shuriken meant to end his life. And Naruto, small, furious, chakra boiling under his skin for the first time in genuine anger, creates an army of clones and beats Mizuki within an inch of his life. That part of the story we're keeping. That part matters. That's still who Naruto is at his core. But here's where we diverge. After Mizuki was gone, dragged off by the ANBU who'd finally arrived, too late to do anything but clean up, Iruka knelt in front of Naruto in the moonlit clearing, untied the leaf-emblazoned headband from his own forehead, and tied it around Naruto's instead. Congratulations, Iruka said, voice rough with exhaustion and something warmer underneath it. You graduate. If you've seen the original story, you remember how this scene goes. The hug. The tears. The quiet joy of a boy who finally belonged to something. We're keeping all of that. Don't worry, you'll get that moment in full. But right after it, after Iruka helped him to his feet, after the two of them started the long walk back toward the village gates, something happened that never happened in the story you know. The Forbidden Scroll, still slung over Naruto's back because Iruka hadn't had the chance to take it from him yet, slipped. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some cosmic sign or prophetic wind gust. Naruto just stumbled over a root in the dark, the strap loosened, and the massive scroll thudded to the forest floor with a heavy, hollow sound. A hollow sound. Now, if you've ever moved furniture, You know the difference between something solid hitting the ground and something with empty space inside it. And Irika, sharp, observant, academy instructor Irika, noticed it too. "Huh," he said, crouching down. "That's strange." "What's strange?" Naruto asked, rubbing the back of his head. Irika ran his fingers along the scroll's outer casing, thick, dark wood polished by decades of handling, wrapped in aged fabric bindings. And there, along the underside, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it, was a hairline seam. "This scroll," Irika murmured, more to himself than to Naruto, "isn't supposed to have a compartment." Naruto blinked. "A compartment? Like a secret one?" "I don't know," Irika admitted. He glanced toward the village, then back down at the scroll, torn between duty and curiosity. Finally, he sighed. "This should probably go straight back to Lord Third's vault. Whatever's in there, it's not for us to." The seam split open. Not from anything Irika did. Not from anything Naruto did, either, at least not consciously. But the moment Naruto's hand brushed against the scroll's casing while he reached down to help steady it, a thin line of pale blue light traced itself along the hidden seam, and the false bottom of the forbidden scroll case swung open like it had been waiting for exactly this hand to touch it. Both of them froze. Inside the hidden compartment was a second scroll. Smaller. Older. The wood of its spindles had darkened with age, and the fabric wrapping it had faded from what might once have been a deep red into a dull, brownish rust. There was no flashy insignia on it. No dramatic seal glowing in the moonlight. Just a small, worn tag tied to the binding cord, with 3 faded characters brushed onto it in ink that had clearly been retraced more than once over the years to keep it legible. Irika picked it up carefully, almost reverently, and turned it over in his hands. "I don't recognize this," he said slowly. "This isn't standard archive labeling. This is old, really old." "Well, open it," Naruto said, already leaning in, all exhaustion from the night forgotten. "Naruto, this isn't..." Irika stopped himself, looking at the tag again, then at the boy in front of him, freshly graduated, headband still slightly crooked on his forehead. Something about the timing of all this, the boy finding this, tonight, of all nights, made the hair on the back of Irika's neck stand up. "This needs to go to Lord Hokage," Irika said finally. "Immediately. Come on. Now look, I know some of you watching are thinking, okay, cool, mysterious scroll, got it, when do we get to the Fuinjutsu?" Patience. Every great story needs its seed planted before it can grow. And this scene, right here, walking through the dark streets of Konoha with a Genin Academy graduate, and his teacher carrying a scroll neither of them understood yet, is the seed. But before we go further, if this kind of slow burn power fantasy is your thing, do me a favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel more than you'd think, and it lets me know you want to see where Naruto's sealing journey actually takes him. Okay. Back to the story. The Hokage's office was quiet at this hour, lit by a single lamp on the desk and the dim glow of moonlight through the windows. Hiruzen Sarutobi sat behind his desk in his sleeping robes, having been woken by an ANBU messenger the moment word of the Forbidden Scroll incident reached him. He looked older in this light, the lines on his face deeper, the weight of decades of leadership sitting heavier on his shoulders than usual. He listened to Irika's report calmly enough. The theft, Mizuki's betrayal, the fight in the clearing, Naruto's unexpected mastery of the Shadow Clone Jutsu. He nodded along, unsurprised by most of it. Mizuki's treachery had been suspected for weeks. The rest was simply Naruto being Naruto, reckless, resourceful, and stubborn enough to succeed anyway. But when Irika set the second scroll down on the desk, Hiruzen's expression changed entirely. He went very still. "Where," the old man said slowly, "did you find this?" "Inside the Forbidden Scroll's casing, Lord Hokage," Irika answered. "There was a hidden compartment. I've never seen anything like it." Naruto's hand brushed against it, and it just opened. Hiruzen's gaze moved to Naruto, who was standing a little straighter now, sensing that whatever this was, it was a bigger deal than he'd first assumed. "Do you know what this is, Naruto?" the Hokage asked quietly. "No, old man," Naruto said honestly. "Should I?" Hiruzen let out a long breath through his nose, somewhere between a sigh and a rueful, disbelieving laugh. He reached out and carefully untied the aged cord holding the scroll shut, unrolling it just enough to glance at the first few lines of cramped, elegant handwriting inside. His eyes scanned the page, and something in his posture, some old grief, carefully buried for decades, rose briefly to the surface before he pushed it back down. This, Hiruzen said finally, rolling the scroll back up with the same careful reverence Irika had shown earlier, belonged to Mito Uzumaki. Naruto blinked. Who? Of course he didn't know. Why would he? Nobody had ever told him. Irika, however, straightened sharply. The first Hokage's wife, he said. The first Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox. The room went very quiet. Naruto's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Wait, she had the fox sealed in her too? Like me? Before you, yes, Hiruzen said. For decades, in fact. Mito Uzumaki held the nine tails far longer than anyone before or since, and did so with a mastery of sealing techniques that has never been equaled in this village. Not by her successor. Not by anyone. He set the scroll down on the desk between them, resting one hand on top of it like he was still deciding whether to let it go any further. When she passed the burden of the nine tails on, and eventually passed away herself, Hiruzen continued. Her personal research was gathered and sealed away. Out of respect for her family's wishes and out of caution, some of what she developed was simply too dangerous to leave in careless hands. I had thought this particular journal was stored in the archive vaults beneath this tower. I did not know it had ever left them. So how did it end up in the Forbidden Scroll? Irika asked. Hiruzen was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. Perhaps a clerical error, decades ago. Perhaps something else entirely. The how matters less right now than the fact that it did. He looked back at Naruto, really looked at him, the way a grandfather might look at a grandson he was suddenly, unexpectedly worried about and proud of in equal measure. Naruto, he said. Do you understand what Fuinjutsu is? Sealing stuff, Naruto said with a shrug. Like the tags Irika-sensei uses to store scrolls and stuff? That is a small piece of it, Hiruzen said. Fuinjutsu, at its highest level, is one of the rarest and most demanding shinobi arts in existence. It is the art of binding, storing, restraining, or unleashing chakra through written seals, and it requires precision, patience, and an intimate understanding of chakra flow that few shinobi ever develop. Mito Uzumaki was, without exaggeration, the finest sealing master this village has ever produced. The technique that binds the nine tails inside you, Naruto, the very reason you are alive and whole today instead of torn apart by a demon's chakra, exists because of Fuinjutsu knowledge pioneered by women, and men like her. Naruto looked down at the old scroll sitting innocently on the Hokage's desk like it hadn't just rearranged something fundamental about how he saw himself. So this is hers, he said slowly. Her actual notes. It appears to be, yes. There was a long silence. Irika glanced between the Hokage and his newest graduate, clearly uncertain where this was heading. Hiruzen studied Naruto's face carefully. By all rights, the old Hokage said eventually, this should be returned to the archive vaults immediately, and access restricted as it has been for years. Naruto's shoulders slumped, just slightly, though he tried not to show it. However, Hiruzen's tone shifted, and something almost like amusement flickered at the corner of his mouth. The seal on that hidden compartment did not open for me. It did not open for Irika. It opened for you, Naruto, the moment your hand touched it, and by the account given to me, without any conscious effort at all on your part. He tapped the desk once, thoughtfully. Seals like that are not accidents. They are keyed. Deliberately, carefully keyed, usually to blood, or to chakra signature, or both. Someone, at some point, wanted this scroll to eventually find its way to someone specific. Naruto's breath caught. You think it was meant for me? I think, Hiruzen said carefully, that Mito Uzumaki and your mother shared a great deal in common, Naruto, and that bloodlines carry more than most people realize. He didn't say more than that, not yet. Some truths, he'd long ago decided, needed to be earned before they could be given, and the full weight of Naruto's parentage was not a conversation for tonight. Exhausted and reeling as the boy already was. But the seed was planted here too. You'll see it grow, trust me. Alright, quick pause here. Because I know some of you are already screaming at your screens going, just tell him already, old man. I promise you, we are building to that. Every great Sealing Master story needs a foundation before the reveal hits with its full weight. So stick with me. And hey, if you haven't already, drop a comment telling me what other what-if premises you want to see explored on this channel. I read every single one, and some of my best series ideas have come straight from you guys. Now, back to that office, and the decision that was about to change everything. Hiruzen leaned back in his chair, considering. I am not going to simply hand you the complete, unsupervised research of the greatest Fuinjutsu master in this village's history, Naruto, he said finally. Even setting aside the danger of some of the more advanced techniques within, Fuinjutsu mishandled can maim, or kill the practitioner, as easily as any enemy. This is not something to be self-taught through trial and error out of a scroll far above your current level. Naruto's face fell. However, Hiruzen continued, and Naruto's head snapped back up. I also do not believe in denying a graduate genin the tools that may be rightfully theirs, especially tools that seem to have chosen him specifically. So here is what we will do. He set out 3 conditions, counting them on his fingers like the old teacher he'd once been, decades before he ever wore the Hokage's hat. First, this scroll remains in the village archive vaults during the day, where it can be properly studied and protected. You will not be taking it home with you to pore over alone at night, no matter how curious you are. Second, Hiruzen went on undeterred, you will be assigned time, twice a week, under archive supervision, to begin studying the fundamentals of Fuinjutsu theory, not the advanced techniques within Mito's journal itself, not yet, but the basic principles that would allow you to eventually understand them. I will have someone appropriate assigned to guide you. Naruto's eyes had gone wide and bright at the word study, which honestly surprised even Irika a little, given the boys' academy track record. And third, Hiruzen said, his voice softening just slightly, you tell no one outside this room what this scroll contains, or who it once belonged to, until I say otherwise. Not your future team, not your future sensei. This is not because I don't trust you, Naruto. It's because knowledge like this draws attention, and some of that attention would not have your well-being in mind. Do you understand? Naruto straightened, headband gleaming faintly in the lamplight, and for just a moment, something in his expression looked older than his 12 years, a flicker of the seriousness that would, over the coming years, come to define him just as much as his stubbornness and his grin. I understand, old man, he said. I won't tell anyone. Promise. Good. Hiruzen allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Then welcome to your very first B-rank secret, Naruto Uzumaki. Try not to let it go to your head. No promises there, Naruto said, and despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the strangeness of the whole night, he grinned, the same wide, sunny grin that had gotten him through years of being overlooked and underestimated. Irika, watching the exchange, felt something settle in his chest. Whatever this was, whatever it meant, the boy in front of him, the one he'd just given his own headband to less than an hour ago, had just been handed something rare. A path, a real one, chosen specifically for him, out of all the shinobi in the village. That night, walking Naruto back to his apartment through the emptied streets, Irika couldn't help the question that had been sitting in his chest since the Hokage's office. Naruto, he said. Are you excited? About the ceiling thing? Naruto was quiet for a moment, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, the borrowed, his headband still slightly crooked on his forehead. Yeah, he admitted eventually. I mean, I don't really get it yet. Not really. But, he trailed off, searching for the words. Everyone always said I couldn't do the normal stuff. Bunshin, chakra control, all that. But this is something nobody else has. Something that picked me. That's kinda cool, right? It's more than cool, Irika said, smiling. It's an honor, Naruto. Mito Uzumaki is a legend in this village. If even a fraction of her knowledge ends up in your hands one day, you could become someone extraordinary. Naruto's grin widened, and for a second, the tired, battered 12-year-old looked genuinely lit up from the inside. The greatest Fuinjutsu master since Mito Uzumaki, he said, testing the words out loud, clearly liking the sound of them far too much. I like that. I'm gonna be that guy, Irika-sensei. Believe it, Irika laughed, A real laugh, warm and a little disbelieving, the exhaustion of the night momentarily forgotten. One step at a time, Naruto. You graduated tonight. Let's start there. They reached Naruto's apartment building a few minutes later, and Iruka waited at the bottom of the stairs while Naruto climbed up, turning once at the top to wave down at him. Night, Iruka-sensei. Thanks for everything tonight. Get some sleep, Iruka called back. Team assignments are tomorrow. You'll want to be sharp. Naruto disappeared into his apartment, and Iruka stood there a moment longer in the quiet street, looking up at the lit window, before finally turning to head home himself, the strange, heavy weight of the night's events settling slowly into something that felt almost like hope. Inside his apartment, Naruto flopped back onto his bed, still in his jacket, staring up at the cracked ceiling with his new headband resting on his chest where he'd set it down like something precious. Sleep should have come easily. His body ached in a dozen places. He'd been awake for nearly 20 hours straight, and tomorrow was going to be a big day. Team assignments, his first real step toward becoming a shinobi for real. But his mind wouldn't quiet down. Mito Uzumaki, the greatest sealing master in Konoha's history. A journal, her journal, sitting somewhere in the Hokage Tower's archive vaults right now, waiting for him. Waiting, somehow, specifically for him, if Hiruzen's theory about the keyed seal was right. He thought about the moment the hidden compartment had opened. The way the pale light had traced itself along that hairline seemed the instant his hand touched the scroll's casing. Not Iruka's hand. Not some A&B guard's hand. In all the years the scroll had presumably sat locked away before tonight. His hand. Naruto sat up slowly in the dark, flexing his fingers, staring at his own palm like it might hold some answer written into the lines of his skin. Why me? He murmured to the empty room. Not with doubt, exactly, more with the restless curiosity of a boy who'd spent his whole life being told he wasn't enough, suddenly handed a reason that maybe, just maybe, he was more than anyone had ever bothered to notice. He thought about what Hiruzen had said, bloodlines carry more than most people realize, and about the way the old man's face had gone carefully, deliberately neutral right after saying it, like he'd stepped right up to the edge of something he wasn't ready to say out loud yet. There was more to this. Naruto could feel it, the same instinctive way he could always tell when someone in a room was hiding something behind a forced smile. Whatever the full truth was, the Hokage wasn't ready to hand it over. Not yet. But he would be. Someday. Naruto could be patient for that, probably, mostly, if he really tried. What he couldn't be patient about, he realized, lying back down and finally letting his eyes drift shut, was learning everything that journal had to teach him. The greatest Fuinjutsu master since Mito Uzumaki. He liked the sound of that title a lot more than dead last. Morning came too early, the way it always did after a night like that one. Naruto groaned, rolled over, and nearly fell off his bed when his hand landed on something hard and metal instead of his pillow. He blinked blearily down at his headband, still resting where he'd set it the night before, and for one groggy second forgot entirely why it was there. Then it hit him all at once. Mizuki, the forest, the shadow clone jutsu, Iruka's hug, the hidden scroll, the Hokage's office, Mito Uzumaki. He sat bolt upright so fast he nearly gave himself whiplash. I'm a genin, he said out loud to his empty apartment, grinning stupidly at the wall. I'm actually a genin. He was out of bed, into his jacket, and out the door in record time, headband tied proudly around his forehead exactly the way Iruka had shown him. The morning air of Konoha felt different somehow, sharper, brighter, like the whole village had shifted slightly to make room for the person he was about to become. Team assignments happened at the academy, same building he'd spent years failing in, and Naruto took a strange, private satisfaction in walking through those doors not as a student anymore, but as a graduate waiting to hear which team he'd been placed on. You know how this part goes if you've seen the original. Iruka reads out the team rosters. Sakura Haruno nearly falls out of her chair with excitement when she hears she's been paired with Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto groans dramatically when he hears he's on the same team as both of them. Team 7 is announced, and the wait for their sensei begins. We're keeping that beat. It's too good not to. But there's a small addition to the scene worth mentioning, something that happened just before Iruka started reading names. Naruto had arrived early enough that the classroom was still mostly empty, just a scattering of other new genin chatting quietly among themselves. He slid into his usual seat near the back, and a moment later, Irika entered from the side office, arms full of paperwork, looking considerably more rested than he had any right to be after the night before. Their eyes met across the room, and Irika gave him a small, private nod, the kind that said good morning and I haven't forgotten what happened last night all at once. Naruto grinned back and gave a thumbs up. It was such a small moment. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But it mattered because it was the first sign that whatever had changed for Naruto the night before, it wasn't going away with the morning light. This wasn't a dream. It was real, and it was his, and he intended to hold on to it. Class filled in around him, Sakura arriving in a rush, Sasuke settling into his seat with his usual detached calm, Shikamaru already looking half asleep, Kiba loudly greeting Akamaru, Hinata quietly taking her seat near the front, her long-sleeved jacket zipped up to her collar against the morning chill. The academy classroom buzzed with the particular, nervous energy of 12-year-olds about to learn who they'd be spending the next several years of their lives with. Irika cleared his throat, and the room settled. All right, he said, shuffling his papers into order. Before we begin team assignments, I want to say, congratulations, all of you, on making it this far. Becoming a genin is just the beginning of a much longer road, but it's an important first step, and I'm proud of every one of you. A few scattered claps. Naruto whooped loudly enough that Sakura shot him an irritated look, which he cheerfully ignored. Team 7, Irika read out, will consist of Naruto Uzumaki. Yes. Sakura Haruno. Sakura's excited gasp was audible 3 rows away. And Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto's triumphant fist pump deflated instantly the moment Sasuke's name landed, replaced by an exaggerated groan that echoed Sakura's delighted squeal in exact opposite proportions. You already know this dynamic. Naruto loud and frustrated. Sakura thrilled beyond words. Sasuke utterly unbothered by either reaction. Your Jonin-sensei will be Kakashi Hatake, Irika finished. He'll meet you here after lunch. Until then, you're all dismissed for a short break. The classroom erupted into a dozen side conversations as teams processed their assignments. Naruto slumped dramatically over his desk, muttering about how unfair it was that he was stuck with Sasuke team of all people, while Sakura, glowing, scooted her chair a few inches closer to Sasuke's, who continued to stare out the window as though none of this concerned him in the slightest. And it was in this exact moment, this small, quiet lull before the real story kicks into gear, that Irika approached Naruto's desk, glancing around briefly to make sure no one else was paying attention. Naruto, he said quietly. A word, please. Naruto perked up immediately, following Irika out into the hallway. Lord Hokage wants you to stop by the archive wing after your team meets Kakashi today, Irika said once they were alone, voice pitched low. He's arranged someone to begin your Fuinjutsu instruction, starting tomorrow, twice a week, just like he said last night. Naruto's eyes went wide. Already? I thought that'd take, like, weeks to set up. When the Hokage wants something arranged quickly, it gets arranged quickly, Irika said, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. Now remember, not a word to your team about any of this. Not to Sasuke, not to Sakura, and especially not to Kakashi, at least not yet. Lord Hokage will decide when and if that changes. I remember, Naruto said, drawing an invisible zipper across his lips. Sealed tighter than a sealing scroll. He beamed at his own joke. Irika did not look impressed, but he was smiling anyway. Go on, Irika said, nudging him back toward the classroom. Go annoy Sasuke some more before lunch. You've got a Jonin-sensei to meet. Now here's a fun bit of foreshadowing for those of you paying close attention, because before we get to the bell test, there's a stop Naruto makes on his own during the lunch break that isn't in the original story at all. While Sakura tried, and mostly failed, to get 5 consecutive minutes of conversation out of Sasuke, and while Sasuke ate his lunch in near total silence somewhere on the academy rooftop, Naruto slipped away toward the small stationery shop 3 streets over, the same one, actually, where he usually bought his instant ramen cups when the Ichiraku stand was closed. Today, though, he wasn't there for ramen. He stood in front of a modest display of writing supplies, brushes, ink pots, blank scrolls, feeling distinctly out of his depth. He had exactly enough of his monthly stipend left to make a very small purchase, and he had absolutely no idea what he was looking at. "Can I help you find something?" the elderly shopkeeper asked, peering over the counter at the boy staring intently at a shelf of ink bottles like they might start explaining themselves. Yeah, Naruto said. "I need, ink. And brushes. For sealing stuff." The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow. "Fuinjutsu supplies? That's a fairly specific request for someone your age." "I'm gonna be the greatest Fuinjutsu master since Mito Uzumaki," Naruto declared, puffing his chest out with far more confidence than his actual knowledge warranted. The shopkeeper blinked, clearly not expecting that particular answer, then let out a short, surprised laugh. "Bold ambition for a boy who, if I'm not mistaken, only graduated the academy yesterday." "Believe it," Naruto said. "Gotta start somewhere, right?" Something about the boy's earnestness, that stubborn, unfiltered sincerity that Naruto carried with him everywhere, whether people wanted it or not, must have landed, because the shopkeeper's expression softened slightly. "Basic sumi ink and a beginner's brush set," the old man said, pulling a small box down from a shelf behind the counter. "This is what most academy students start with, back when Fuinjutsu was still part of the standard curriculum decades ago. It's not much, but it'll teach you control before you waste good ink on mistakes." Naruto counted out his coins carefully, coming up just short, and the shopkeeper, with the particular generosity of someone who'd clearly seen a lot of broke young shinobi come through his shop over the years, waved off the difference with a dismissive grunt. "Consider it an investment," he said. "Come back when you've actually learned something, and maybe I'll believe the Mito Uzumaki talk." Naruto grinned so widely it looked like it might hurt, thanked the man about 6 times in the span of 10 seconds, and hurried back toward the academy with his small box of supplies clutched to his chest like treasure. It wasn't much. A cheap ink pot, 2 brushes, a handful of blank practice paper. But it was his first, and to Naruto, in that moment, it felt like the beginning of everything. Quick pause here, because I want to know from you guys watching, do you like these small, grounded detours into Naruto's learning process? Or do you want to skip straight to the big flashy seal reveals? Let me know in the comments. It genuinely shapes how I pace the rest of the series. Alright. Back to the academy rooftop, where a certain silver-haired jonin is running spectacularly late. You already know how this goes. Kakashi Hatake arrives a full 3 hours after the scheduled meeting time, offers a paper-thin excuse about a black cat crossing his path, and is immediately met with a chorus of groans from Sakura and quiet, simmering irritation from Sasuke. Naruto, for his part, greets Kakashi with the same enthusiastic hostility he'd greet almost any new authority figure, loud, a little suspicious, entirely unimpressed by the man's lazy, half-lidded visible eye, and the mask covering the rest of his face. "You're late," Naruto announced, pointing accusingly. "Yeah, about that," Kakashi said, utterly unbothered. "My first impression of you 3 is, I don't like you." Cue the awkward silence. Cue the rooftop introductions. Kakashi asks each of them to share their names, likes, dislikes, dreams for the future, and, true to form, refuses to share much of anything meaningful about himself beyond his name, and a vague comment about having lots of hobbies. Sakura goes on about Sasuke a little too obviously. Sasuke gives his now famous, chilling monologue about not having dreams so much as an ambition, the restoration of his clan, and the killing of a certain man. The mood on the rooftop drops several degrees, and then it's Naruto's turn. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki," he announced, that same wide grin plastered across his face. "I like ramen, especially from Ichiraku's, and I like, He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, glancing briefly down at the small box of ink and brushes he'd tucked into his jacket pocket, invisible to everyone else but him. "I like learning new stuff," he continued, instead catching himself. "Stuff nobody else can do. And my dream is to become Hokage. Believe it, I'm gonna be so strong everyone in this whole village has to look up to me, no exceptions." It was almost the same declaration you'd remember from the original story, but almost isn't exactly, and if you were watching closely, you'd have caught the half-second pause, the tiny edit Naruto made to his own words before he said them out loud. Learning new stuff. Stuff nobody else can do. He was talking about sealing. He just couldn't say so. Kakashi's visible eye lingered on him for just a moment longer than strictly necessary, not suspicious, exactly, more simply curious. The way you'd look at a puzzle piece that didn't quite match the picture on the box. Then he moved on, unbothered, and explained the real test still waiting for them the next morning, the survival exercise that would determine whether they actually became genin, or got sent back to the academy. Don't eat breakfast, Kakashi added cheerfully as he dismissed them, or you'll throw up. That night, Naruto sat cross-legged on his apartment floor, a single practice sheet spread out in front of him, ink pot balanced precariously on a stack of ramen cup lids serving as an improvised table. He dipped the cheap brush into the ink, took a slow breath the way the old shopkeeper had briefly, gruffly demonstrated before shooing him out of the shop, and attempted his first character. The stroke wobbled. Ink splattered. The character came out looking less like careful calligraphy and more like a spider that had fallen into an inkwell, and then staggered dramatically across the page before dying. Naruto stared at it in disgust. That's terrible. He crumpled the sheet, grabbed a fresh one, and tried again, and again, and again. If you've ever tried to learn calligraphy, or honestly any precise physical skill from scratch, you know this feeling. The gap between what you can picture in your head and what your hands are actually capable of producing feels impossibly wide at first. Naruto's frustration mounted with every failed attempt. His usual instinct to just push harder and throw more effort at a problem running headfirst into a skill that, for possibly the first time in his life, actually rewarded patience over brute force. By the 11th sheet, well past midnight, his lines were still crooked, still shaky, still nowhere close to the clean, confident brushstrokes he'd glimpsed in Mito's journal the night before. But they were, marginally, less terrible than sheet number 1. He fell asleep still holding the brush, ink smudged faintly across 2 of his fingers. A small, easily overlooked detail that would matter a great deal, very soon. Morning arrived, and with it, the infamous bell test. You know the setup. A training ground on the outskirts of the village. Kakashi standing calmly with 2 bells tied to his belt, explaining the rules with maddening cheerfulness. Get a bell from him before noon, or go without lunch, tied to one of the 3 posts, and watch the others eat in front of them. Only 2 bells for 3 genin, which means at least one of them fails no matter what happens. It's a trick, obviously. A test of teamwork disguised as a test of individual skill. But nobody explains that part up front, and so Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura scatter into the surrounding forest the moment Kakashi gives the signal, each of them convinced they need to fight for a bell alone. The early parts of the fight play out largely how you'd remember them. Naruto, predictably, charges straight at Kakashi with all the subtlety of a boulder rolling downhill, gets tossed around effortlessly, and ends up buried up to his neck in dirt courtesy of Kakashi's earth-style jutsu, muttering threats the whole time that the Jonin barely acknowledges. Sasuke attempts a more calculated approach, testing Kakashi with fire jutsu and taijutsu, learning quickly just how far out of his depth he actually is. Sakura, wandering the forest alone, gets caught in a low-level genjutsu that convinces her Sasuke has been brutally injured, and promptly faints from the shock. Kakashi, true to form, spends most of the fight with a book held up in front of his face, treating the entire exercise as barely worth his full attention. But here's where things start to diverge, and it happens in the second confrontation between Naruto and Kakashi, the one that occurs after Naruto digs himself out of the dirt, furious and humiliated, and decides that brute force clearly isn't working. Naruto crouched behind a thick cluster of bushes at the edge of the training ground, breathing hard, dirt still clinging to his hair and jacket. His first approach had been a disaster. Charging Kakashi head-on had accomplished nothing except getting him buried alive and thoroughly mocked. He needed something else. Something Kakashi wouldn't see coming. His hand brushed against his jacket pocket, and he felt the small, hard shape of the practice ink pot he'd stubbornly carried with him that morning, along with 2 hastily, imperfectly drawn tags he'd managed to scratch out the night before between failed calligraphy attempts. Nothing fancy, nothing close to the advanced sealing work described in Mito's journal. Just a crude paralysis tag he'd copied, badly, from one of the only diagrams simple enough for him to even attempt. He genuinely had no idea if it would work. He'd never tested it on anything except a stray cat that had wandered too close to his windowsill 3 nights ago, and even then, the effect had lasted maybe 4 seconds before fizzling out entirely. But 4 seconds might be enough. Naruto peeked through the bushes and spotted Kakashi standing in a small clearing, one hand still holding his book open, the other tucked casually in his pocket, radiating the kind of relaxed confidence that made Naruto's blood boil. Slowly, carefully, Naruto created 2 shadow clones, the one technique he actually had full confidence in, and sent them circling wide through the trees on either side of the clearing while he stayed hidden, tag held ready between 2 fingers. The clones burst out from the treeline first, drawing Kakashi's attention with a loud, clumsy taijutsu assault that the Jonin dispatched almost lazily, barely glancing up from his book, but it was enough of a distraction. While Kakashi's attention was split, however briefly, between the 2 clones converging on him, Naruto darted out from the bushes low and fast, slapping the crude paralysis tag directly onto Kakashi's exposed forearm as he passed. For one heart-stopping second, nothing happened, and Naruto's stomach dropped, certain the whole gamble had failed. Then Kakashi's arm twitched, stiffened, and for just a moment, barely more than a second and a half, by Naruto's later, breathless estimate, the Jonin's entire right side seized up, muscles locking involuntarily, his book slipping half out of his grip. It wasn't much. It wasn't even close to a real paralysis technique. But it was enough of a flicker of genuine surprise to cross Kakashi's visible eye that Naruto, watching from a few feet away with wide eyes of his own, felt a surge of triumph so intense it nearly knocked the wind out of him. He'd done it. He'd actually made a seal that worked, even for a second and a half, on an actual Jonin. Naruto's shadow clones, sensing the opening, lunged for the bells, and got a foot planted squarely in each of their chests for their trouble, popping out of existence in twin puffs of smoke half a heartbeat later, the paralysis wearing off Kakashi's arm just in time for him to intercept them. But Naruto himself, in that brief window, managed to close his fingers around the edge of one bell's cord before Kakashi's other hand closed around his wrist, stopping him cold. Not bad, Kakashi said, and for the first time since they'd met him, there was no trace of lazy dismissal in his tone at all. His visible eye had narrowed, fixed not on Naruto's face, but on the boy's fingers, specifically, on the faint gray-black smudges of ink still staining 2 of them, and on the crumpled remains of the paralysis tag now stuck uselessly to his own forearm. He peeled the tag off carefully, turning it over between 2 fingers, studying the crude, shaky brushwork with an expression Naruto couldn't quite read. Where, Kakashi asked slowly, did you learn to make this? Naruto froze, Iruka's warning from the day before ringing loud in his head. Not a word about the scroll, not to Sasuke, not to Sakura, not to Kakashi. Naruto said, yanking his wrist free and taking a hurried step back. Nowhere. I mean, I made it up. Just messing around, that's all. It wasn't remotely convincing, and both of them seemed to know it. But Kakashi, to Naruto's visible relief, didn't push any further, not yet. He simply tucked the used tag into his own pocket with an idle, unreadable expression, and gestured for Naruto to step back. We'll discuss it later, Kakashi said, in a tone that made it very clear later was not optional. For now, the test isn't over. You already know how the rest of the bell test unfolds. Naruto, tied to the wooden post for attempting to sneak food during the break Kakashi allows them, defiantly shares his lunch with the starving Sakura and Sasuke anyway, ignoring Kakashi's explicit rule against it. Kakashi, appearing in a sudden burst of intimidating chakra and thunderclouds, appears ready to fail all 3 of them on the spot for the rule violation, before revealing, in that classic reversal, that they've actually passed. Because they finally understood, if only for a moment, that teamwork mattered more than individual glory. Those who break the rules are scum, Kakashi tells them, and that line you've probably heard quoted 100 times if you've been in this fandom for more than a week. But those who abandon their friends are worse than scum. Team 7 is officially formed. The 3 of them, exhausted and battered, share a rare moment of genuine camaraderie before heading their separate ways for the day. But this chapter isn't quite done yet. Because Kakashi Hatake does not forget things easily, and a crude, half-effective paralysis tag stuck to his forearm during a genin test is not something his sharp, analytical mind is simply going to let go. That evening, in a quiet corner of a small tea house near the center of the village, the kind of place with paper lanterns swaying gently outside and the low murmur of contented conversation drifting from every table, Kakashi sat alone at a corner booth, a cup of green tea steaming gently in front of him, the crumpled paralysis tag spread out flat on the table. He studied it for a long moment, turning it slightly under the lantern light. The brushwork was rough. Genuinely, undeniably amateur, the kind of shaky, uncertain strokes you'd expect from someone who'd picked up a brush for the very first time within the last day or two. And yet, underneath all that roughness, the actual seal formula itself was sound. More than sound, honestly. The character combinations, the specific chakra disruption pattern layered into the design. It was crude in execution, but genuinely competent in theory. The kind of foundational structure that took most Fuinjutsu students months, sometimes years, to properly grasp even at a basic level. Kakashi had seen handwriting like this before. Not identical. Naruto's was far messier, far less refined, but the underlying bones of the technique, the specific approach to chakra disruption seals, tugged at a memory buried more than a decade deep. His late sensei, Minato Namikaze. The fourth Hokage himself had been no slouch at Fuinjutsu, nowhere near Mito Uzumaki's level, by all accounts, but skilled enough that some of his personal jutsu had incorporated sealing elements few other shinobi in the village could replicate. Kakashi remembered faintly, watching Minato sketch out similar foundational seal structures during quiet moments between missions, explaining the theory behind chakra disruption tags to a young, eager Kakashi who'd honestly cared more about taijutsu at the time and only half listened. It wasn't the same handwriting. It wasn't even close, honestly. But something about the underlying logic of the seal, the bones beneath the flesh, so to speak, felt eerily, uncomfortably familiar. Kakashi took a slow sip of his tea, turning the tag over once more, his single visible eye narrowed in thought. Coincidence, probably. Fuinjutsu theory had certain universal building blocks. After all, it wasn't impossible for two people, decades apart, to independently arrive at similar foundational structures. Naruto had likely just found some old training scroll somewhere, copied the basics badly, and gotten lucky with the timing during the bell test. Probably. And yet. Kakashi folded the tag carefully and tucked it into an inner pocket of his flak jacket, making a small, private mental note to keep an eye on his newest genin's progress rather more closely than he might otherwise have bothered. The weeks between the bell test and the wave mission passed in a steady, grinding rhythm that Naruto had never experienced before in his life. Routine. Team 7 took on the usual string of D-rank missions that genin teams cut their teeth on, weeding gardens, chasing down a spectacularly uncooperative cat named Tora, painting fences, running errands for elderly villagers who complained about absolutely everything. Naruto groaned through every single one of them, same as always, loudly declaring to anyone who'd listen that he didn't become a shinobi to pull weeds. But underneath the surface of all that familiar complaining, something new had settled into his schedule. Twice a week, in the early evening after training with Kakashi wrapped up, Naruto made his way to a quiet, restricted section of the Hokage Tower archives, where a mild-mannered Chunin archivist named Ebisu, no, wait, not Ebisu, someone else, a woman this time, an older Chunin named Hana Tsurugi who specialized in document preservation and had a decent working knowledge of sealing fundamentals, walked him through the absolute basics of Fuinjutsu theory. It was slow. It was frustrating. It was, in many ways, the opposite of everything Naruto naturally gravitated toward. Chakra control, Hana told him during their second session, watching him fumble through a basic ink flow exercise with visible impatience, is not something you can force through sheer stubbornness, Naruto. Fuinjutsu punishes impatience severely. A rush brushstroke doesn't just fail, it can misfire entirely, and misfired seals are dangerous. I get it, Naruto muttered, wiping ink off his fingers for what felt like the 100th time that evening. Slow and careful. Got it. You say that, Hana said dryly, and yet your last 4 attempts all look like you were racing someone. Naruto scowled but didn't argue, because honestly, she wasn't wrong. Over those weeks, he learned the true fundamentals, not flashy techniques, not anything close to what Mito's journal actually contained, but the groundwork underneath all of it. How ink interacted with chakra when properly infused. How different brush pressures created different seal densities. How a single miswritten stroke could turn a storage seal into something that either did nothing at all, or, in rarer, more dangerous cases, did something violently unpredictable. He also, slowly, painstakingly, began working through the early pages of Mito's journal itself, under Hana's supervision, translating the archaic phrasing and dense technical shorthand one frustrating paragraph at a time. Most of it was still far beyond him, but certain fragments, smaller, more foundational seal designs Mito had apparently sketched out early in her own long career, before she developed the truly legendary techniques she later became famous for, were, just barely, within Naruto's reach. One of those fragments was a basic paralysis tag design. Crude by any real Fuinjutsu master's standards, but functional, if executed properly. Naruto had copied it, badly, 3 separate times before he managed a version stable enough to test, and even then, only on that unfortunate stray cat, and later, on one very surprised Jonin-sensei during a bell test that neither of them had quite finished discussing. Which brings us to a conversation that happened about 2 weeks after the bell test, one you didn't see in the previous chapter, tucked quietly into a Team 7 training session. Naruto, Kakashi said, catching him alone after Sasuke and Sakura had already headed home for the day. That tag. During the bell test, Naruto's stomach dropped slightly, though he kept his expression carefully neutral, or at least, as neutral as Naruto's face was ever capable of being, which wasn't very. What tag? He tried. Kakashi gave him a flat, unimpressed look that made it very clear the deflection wasn't working. The one that locked up my arm for a second and a half. Where did you learn to make it? Naruto hesitated, chewing the inside of his cheek, torn between his promise to Hiruzen and the simple, uncomfortable fact that Kakashi was his sensei now, and lying to him felt wrong in a way that lying to a stranger never really had. I can't tell you, Naruto said finally. Which was, at least, an honest answer even if it wasn't a satisfying one. It's a secret. Old man Hokage's orders, not mine. Kakashi studied him for a long moment, visible eye unreadable. The Hokage ordered you to keep secrets from your own team's Jonin-sensei? He said I could tell you eventually, Naruto said quickly. Just, not yet. I promise it's not anything bad. I gave my word. There was something almost painfully earnest in the way he said it, the same stubborn sincerity that defined nearly everything Naruto did, and Kakashi, watching him, found himself believing the boy despite the mountain of unanswered questions still sitting behind that statement. All right, Kakashi said eventually, deciding, for now, to let it go. I'll trust Lord Hokage's judgment on this one. But Naruto, if you're teaching yourself Fuinjutsu from some old scroll without proper supervision, that's dangerous. Genuinely dangerous. Seals aren't like ninjutsu. A failed jutsu usually just fizzles. A failed seal can take your hand off. I'm not teaching myself, Naruto said. I've got someone helping me. It's fine, Kakashi-sensei. Really? Kakashi let out a slow breath through his mask, clearly still not thrilled about being kept in the dark, but recognizing the futility of pushing further against both Naruto's stubbornness and an apparent direct order from the Hokage himself. Fine, he said. But if I ever see you attempting something you're not ready for, I'm stepping in. Understood? Understood, Naruto said, relieved the conversation hadn't gone worse. Kakashi turned to leave, then paused, glancing back over his shoulder. For what it's worth, he added, almost offhandedly, that tag was better than it had any right to be, for someone your age with no formal training. Whoever's teaching you the basics is doing a decent job. He left before Naruto could fully process the rare compliment, grinning stupidly to himself in the empty training ground for a solid minute afterward. Alright, now let's get to the mission that actually kicks this chapter's real story into gear. Because you already know what happens next in the original story, Tazuna the bridge builder shows up drunk, loud, and demanding an escort back to the land of waves, insisting the mission's just a simple C-rank bodyguard job. We're keeping that part almost exactly the same, with one small adjustment for you longtime viewers of this channel who know my content guidelines by now. Tazuna's usual introduction, in which he's portrayed drinking, gets swapped here. Instead of a bottle, Tazuna's nursing a large cup of strong tea when Team 7 first meets him, grumbling about needing something to steady his nerves after a long journey, and complaining that the tea isn't strong enough for what he actually needs. Same gruff, exhausted energy, same essential character. Team 7, plus Kakashi, sets out for the land of waves. The early journey plays out largely as you remember, the two Chunin-level mist ninja ambushed them almost immediately, the demon brothers wielding that gauntlet chain between them, and Kakashi's shocking death via substitution jutsu that terrifies the genin before he reveals himself alive and well moments later. Naruto gets nicked slightly by the demon brothers' poison claws in the process. A small wound, nothing serious, but enough to remind everyone that this mission has become considerably more dangerous than the simple C-rank escort job they signed up for. Tazuna's confession follows soon after, the truth about Gato, the crime lord strangling the Land of Waves economy, and the danger this mission actually represents. Kakashi gives the team the choice to turn back. They don't, obviously. This is Naruto's story, after all, and turning back has never really been his style. Here's where things start to diverge, though, subtly at first, in the quiet moments during their travel toward Tazuna's home village. That night, camped in a small clearing partway through the forest, the team settled in for a few hours of rest before continuing the next morning. Sakura and Sasuke drifted off relatively quickly, exhausted from the day's tension. Kakashi took first watch, reading his book by firelight with one eye seemingly always tracking the surrounding treeline despite his apparent nonchalance. Naruto, unable to sleep, sat a short distance away from the fire, quietly unrolling a small scrap of paper and dipping his brush into a travel-sized ink pot he'd insisted on bringing along, much to Sakura's earlier bewilderment. "What are you even doing?" she'd asked back at the village gate, eyeing the small wooden box he'd packed alongside his usual gear. "Studying," Naruto had said, which was true, if deliberately vague, and Sakura had simply rolled her eyes and assumed it was some kind of joke, not pressing further. Now, by the dim firelight, Naruto practiced slow, careful brushstrokes on the scrap of paper, murmuring the character names under his breath the way Hana had taught him, trying to steady the small tremor of exhaustion in his hand. Kakashi, without looking up from his book, spoke quietly. "You're going to want a steadier surface than your own knee for that kind of work." Naruto startled, nearly spilling the ink pot. "You're supposed to be reading." "I contain multitudes," Kakashi said dryly, finally glancing over. "How's the studying going?" Naruto hesitated, then decided that showing Kakashi the actual practice work, without revealing anything about Mito's journal specifically, probably wasn't breaking his promise to Hiruzen. He held up the scrap of paper, a slightly wobbly but recognizable chakra flow character drawn across it. "Better than a month ago," he admitted. "Still bad, though." Kakashi studied the character for a moment, something thoughtful flickering behind his visible eye. "It's not bad, actually. The proportions are off, and your ink density's inconsistent, but the underlying structure's solid." He paused. "You're learning fast for someone with no natural aptitude for stillness." "Is that a compliment, or an insult?" "Bit of both, honestly," Kakashi said, and there was something almost fond in his tone that caught Naruto slightly off guard. "Get some sleep, Naruto. We've got a long day of walking tomorrow, and Wave Country isn't going to be gentle with any of us." Naruto nodded, carefully rolling up his practice paper and tucking it away before finally settling down near the fire to sleep, ink stains still faintly visible on his fingertips in the flickering orange light. "Alright, pause here for a second, because I want to remind you all, this slow burn approach is intentional. Naruto's not going to wake up tomorrow suddenly capable of sealing away Zabuz's entire chakra network. This is a kid with maybe 2 months of actual sealing instruction under his belt, working from fragments of a legendary journal he barely understands yet. The payoff is coming, but it's going to be earned, step by step, and that's what makes it worth watching. If you appreciate that kind of pacing, let me know down in the comments. It really helps me gauge what you all want more of. Now, let's get to Wave Country, and to the fight that's going to change everything for Naruto's confidence in his own sealing abilities, for better and for worse. The team arrived at Tazuna's home village the following afternoon, greeted by the grim, hollowed-out poverty that Gato's crime empire had inflicted on the once prosperous fishing community. You remember this part: the empty markets, the frightened villagers, the pervasive sense of a town slowly being strangled to death by a man who never even had to lift a weapon himself to do it. Tazuna's daughter Tsunami welcomed them into her home, and, worth noting for those tracking the modest attire adjustments, her usual outfit here is portrayed with slightly longer sleeves and a higher neckline than some adaptations show, practical and warm against the coastal chill, fitting naturally with the working-class fishing village setting. The days that followed play out largely as you'd expect. Kakashi begins training the genin in earnest, revealing the truth about his Sharingan's toll on his chakra reserves after the fight with the demon brothers, and prescribing tree-climbing chakra control exercises to help all three genin, and himself, recovering, build up their reserves and precision. You know this part of the story. Sasuke picks up the exercise quickly, his competitive drive pushing him toward incremental progress each day. Sakura, to everyone's mild surprise, masters it almost immediately, her naturally excellent chakra control putting both boys to shame despite her comparatively weaker raw reserves. And Naruto struggles, badly, his enormous chakra reserves working against him rather than for him, the sheer volume of energy he has to control making fine precision agonizingly difficult. But here's a small addition worth mentioning. During the evenings, after a full day of failed attempts at tree climbing that leave Naruto bruised, frustrated, and covered in bark scrapes, he pulls out his ink and brush anyway, working through slow, careful sealing exercises by lamplight in Tizuna's home, using the same principles of gradual, controlled chakra output that the tree climbing exercise was meant to teach, just applied through a different, quieter discipline. It's Sakura, actually, who first notices the parallel. You know, she said one evening, glancing over from where she sat sharpening a kunai, watching Naruto hunched over a scrap of paper with fierce concentration, tongue poking slightly out the side of his mouth. That's basically the same thing Kakashi-sensei's trying to teach us with the tree exercise. Controlling small amounts of chakra precisely instead of just dumping everything you've got into it. Naruto blinked up at her, surprised. Huh. I guess it kind of is. Where'd you even learn that stuff? Sakura asked, curious despite herself. I've never seen you care about anything requiring this much patience before. It's a secret, Naruto said, which by now had become something of a running joke between the two of them, Sakura rolling her eyes good-naturedly rather than pressing further, the way you might with a friend whose quirks you'd simply learn to accept. But that small moment mattered because it planted something in Naruto's mind he hadn't fully considered before. That maybe the discipline required for sealing work and the discipline required for proper chakra control weren't two separate skills at all, but two expressions of the exact same underlying foundation. The next morning, when Naruto returned to the tree climbing exercise, something had shifted, however slightly. He still didn't master it as quickly as Sakura, not by a long shot, but for the first time, his failed attempts started failing slightly less catastrophically small. Incremental improvements accumulating instead of pure, chaotic thrashing against a problem he couldn't brute force his way through. Then came Zabuza's second attack. You know this fight. The demon of the hidden mist ambushing the team at the bridge construction site, the terrifying wall of mist rolling in, Zabuza's massive cleaver-like blade, and Kakashi's grim recognition of an opponent who'd once nearly killed him. The Sharingan reveal. Kakashi's warning to the genin to protect Tizuna and stay out of the fight entirely. And then, of course, Haku's arrival, the masked hunter nin whose true loyalties and gentler nature remain hidden beneath a chillingly effective battle mask, whose ice mirror technique traps Sasuke in a dazzling, lethal dome of reflective surfaces while Naruto watches from outside, helpless and furious. This is where our story's divergence really earns its keep. In the original telling, Naruto charges recklessly into the ice dome to help Sasuke, gets trapped alongside him, and the two of them endure a brutal, Senbon-riddled beating before Sasuke's growing Sharingan and Naruto's Nine-Tails-fueled endurance eventually turn the tide. We're keeping the emotional core of that sequence, the reckless charge to help a teammate, the brutal beating, the slow dawning respect between Naruto and Sasuke forged in shared suffering. But the mechanics of how Naruto starts fighting back shift in a very specific way. Trapped inside the ice dome, Saban needles raining down from every angle, Sasuke already bleeding from a dozen small wounds and slowing with exhaustion, Naruto, battered, furious, and running low on options, made a split-second decision that nobody, least of all himself, had planned for. He'd been carrying 3 explosive tags in his jacket pocket for the entire mission. Not sophisticated ones, crude, barely functional copies of a basic combustion seal from an early page of Mito's journal. Tags he'd drawn and redrawn a dozen times over the past several weeks without ever actually testing them in real combat, honestly more out of habit than genuine strategic planning. He'd never had the nerve to try them on anything living. He barely trusted them not to fizzle out entirely, or worse, backfire in his own hand. But Haku's ice mirrors, unlike a living target, were pure condensed chakra given physical form. And physical form meant physical structure, which meant, theoretically, a structure a well-placed disruption could crack. Sasuke! Naruto shouted, voice raw. Cover your eyes. Sasuke, bleeding and exhausted, didn't have the energy to argue, throwing an arm up over his face on pure reflexive trust a half-second before Naruto slapped one of his crude explosive tags directly against the nearest ice mirror's surface and threw himself backward. The tag ignited with a violent, uneven crack, nowhere near a clean, controlled detonation, more like a poorly aimed firework going off far too close to its target, and the mirror it struck shattered, not from raw destructive force alone, but from the chakra disruption embedded in the seal's design, interrupting the delicate structure holding the ice's form together. Haku, mid-motion inside the technique, staggered visibly as one of her mirrors collapsed entirely, the sudden break in her jutsu's symmetry costing her a precious half-second of focus. It wasn't a clean victory. Far from it. The explosion's uneven force sent a spray of ice shrapnel across Naruto's exposed forearm, opening up a nasty gash that immediately started bleeding freely, and the recoil of the poorly controlled seal knocked him hard onto his back, momentarily winded. But it worked. One mirror down, out of the dozen or so still surrounding them, and more importantly, it proved something Naruto hadn't fully believed until that exact moment, that his sealing work, however crude, however dangerous and unrefined, could actually change the outcome of a real fight against a real, skilled opponent. Naruto! Sasuke barked, glancing over at the blood now soaking through Naruto's sleeve. What was that? Don't know if I want to explain that right now. Naruto shouted back, scrambling to his feet, cradling his bleeding arm against his chest while fumbling for his second-to-last explosive tag with his other hand. Just keep your eyes covered if I say so again. Haku, recovering quickly from the momentary disruption, regrouped and resumed her assault, the remaining mirrors closing ranks tighter than before, clearly recognizing that whatever Naruto had just done posed a genuine threat to her technique's integrity. The fight that followed was brutal, messy, and far from any kind of clean tactical triumph. Naruto managed to detonate one more tag before Haku, adapting quickly, began targeting him specifically with a hail of Saban aimed at disabling his hands before he could deploy another, a decision that cost Sasuke several additional wounds as he threw himself in front of Naruto. To shield him, the two of them slowly, painfully forging the beginning of a genuine mutual respect either boy would have predicted a few weeks earlier. By the time the fight's larger arc resolved, Haku's tragic backstory, her devotion to Zabuza, the gut-wrenching sacrifice she makes later to save him from Kakashi's Chidori, Zabuza's own eventual death and last-minute redemption, Naruto had used the last of his 3 explosive tags, his forearm wrapped in a hasty, blood-soaked bandage, his ink-stained fingers trembling with exhaustion, and the lingering ache of chakra strain he didn't fully understand how to manage yet. He'd very nearly lost the arm entirely. A slightly less lucky shrapnel spray, a slightly less well-timed flinch, and that gash could have been catastrophically worse. It was a stark, painful lesson in exactly how dangerous underpracticed Fuinjutsu could be, a lesson Naruto absorbed with far more seriousness than any lecture from Hana or Kakashi could have taught him. That evening, back at Tazuna's home, while Sakura carefully redressed the wound on his forearm, muttering under her breath about reckless idiots who apparently thought homemade explosives were a reasonable substitute for actual jutsu, Kakashi found a quiet moment to speak with Naruto alone on the porch outside. That was reckless, Kakashi said, without preamble, watching the boy wince as Sakura's careful hands worked. Genuinely, dangerously reckless. You could have lost that arm, Naruto. Or worse. I know, Naruto admitted, quieter than usual, all his earlier bravado from the fight drained out of him now that the adrenaline had faded. It was the only idea I had. And it worked. Kind of. It did work, Kakashi acknowledged. Which is exactly why I'm not going to tell you to stop developing this skill. But Naruto, you need real training. Structured, supervised training, with someone who actually understands Fuinjutsu at a level far beyond crude explosive tags copy from wherever you're copying them from. He paused, studying Naruto's face carefully. I think it's time I spoke with Lord Hokage about arranging exactly that, the moment we're back in the village. Whatever secret you two are keeping, I think it's time it gets a proper foundation instead of you nearly losing limbs experimenting alone. Naruto looked up at him, something hopeful flickering behind the exhaustion in his eyes. You really think the old man would go for that? I think, Kakashi said, glancing briefly out toward the dark water beyond Tazuna's home, where the unfinished bridge stood as a quiet symbol of the entire, exhausting mission, that whatever you're carrying inside that little ink box of yours, Naruto, deserves better guidance than trial and error against an enemy who nearly took your arm off. I owe you at least that much, as your sensei. Naruto managed a tired, genuine smile. Thanks, Kakashi-sensei. Don't thank me yet, Kakashi said, a familiar note of dry humor returning to his voice. You've still got Sakura to deal with. I believe she's currently deciding between finishing that bandage gently, or finishing it as punishment for scaring the life out of both of us. From inside, Sakura's voice rang out, sharp with residual panic and irritation in equal measure. I heard that, Kakashi-sensei. The Wave Country arc wraps up from here largely the way you remember. Gato's betrayal of Zabuza. The mercenaries he'd hired instead turning on him. Zabuza's final, redemptive stand against his former employer's men despite his own grievous wounds. And Haku's tragic death weighing over the whole final confrontation like a shroud. The bridge gets built. The village slowly begins to heal. Team 7 heads home to Konoha, considerably more battle-scarred and considerably more bonded than when they left. But there's one more quiet scene worth including before we close this chapter out. The night before the team's departure, Naruto sitting alone at the edge of the unfinished bridge, staring out at the water, his bandaged forearm resting in his lap. Sasuke found him there, unusually, and sat down beside him without a word for a long moment. That seal, Sasuke said eventually. The one that broke Haku's mirror. Where'd you actually learn that? Naruto hesitated, the familiar weight of his promise to Hiruzen settling over him again. Can't say yet, he admitted. But I promise, when I actually can, you'll be one of the first people I tell. Sasuke studied him for a moment, something unreadable in his dark eyes, then simply nodded, apparently satisfied enough with that answer for now. It was reckless, he said finally. But it worked. Get better at it. I don't want to owe you my life again next time without you having something solid to back it up. It wasn't quite a thank you. This was Sasuke, after all. But it was close enough, and Naruto took it for exactly the rare olive branch it was. Yeah, Naruto said, smiling faintly out at the dark water. I will. I'm gonna get so good at this, Sasuke, you won't even recognize me. We'll see, Sasuke said, but there was, uncharacteristically, the faintest ghost of something like respect in his voice. Team 7 returned to Konoha exhausted, sore, and considerably more battle-hardened than the group of genin who'd left just a couple weeks earlier. Tazuna and the villagers had seen them off at the newly finished bridge, which, in a small detail some of you might appreciate, the villagers decided to name the Great Naruto Bridge in the original story, and we're keeping that exact beat here. Because honestly it's too perfect a piece of foreshadowing to cut. The walk back through the village gates felt different this time. Naruto held himself a little straighter. Sasuke, though he never admitted out loud, glanced over at Naruto more than once during the journey home with something that had shifted from disdain into cautious respect. And Sakura, watching the two of them, seemed to sense that whatever had happened out on that bridge had changed the entire chemistry of her team for good. Kakashi dismissed the team for a few days of rest once they passed through the gates, then, true to his word, made his way directly to the Hokage's tower. Hiruzen listened to Kakashi's report with his usual measured patience. The mission particulars, Zabuza, Haku, Gato's betrayal, the bridge's completion. But when Kakashi reached the part about Naruto's improvised explosive tag shattering one of Haku's ice mirrors, the old Hokage's expression sharpened considerably. He used an explosive seal, Hiruzen repeated slowly. In actual combat. Against a trained hunter nin. He did, Kakashi confirmed. And it worked, Lord Hokage, badly, recklessly, and it very nearly cost him his arm in the process, but it worked. He's been carrying homemade tags around for weeks now, apparently, without my knowledge until that fight forced his hand. Hiruzen leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, an old, familiar weight settling behind his eyes. He'd known this day was coming from the moment that scroll had opened for Naruto months ago, known that a boy with his sheer stubbornness and hunger to prove himself was never going to be content sitting quietly in an archive room twice a week, patiently working through theory at a snail's pace, when there was a war waiting for him just past the horizon of his own ambition. I assume, Hiruzen said, that you have questions. Several, Kakashi admitted. Starting with where a 12-year-old genin is getting Fuinjutsu training advanced enough to improvise something that actually disrupts a chakra-based technique mid-battle. That's not academy-level theory, Lord Hokage. That's not even standard Chunin-level theory. Hiruzen was quiet for a long moment, weighing exactly how much to reveal. He'd sworn Naruto to secrecy in part to protect the boy, to keep the existence of Mito's journal, and the deeper implications of who might have keyed that hidden compartment specifically to Naruto's touch, away from ears that might use the information against him. But Kakashi wasn't just any jonin. He was Naruto's sensei, his direct protector during missions, and if Naruto was going to keep experimenting with sealing work in the field, recklessly, dangerously, as Wave Country had just proven, then Kakashi needed enough context to actually help guide him, rather than stumbling along half-blind. What I'm about to tell you, Hiruzen said finally, does not leave this room without my explicit permission. Am I understood? Kakashi's visible eye narrowed slightly, sensing the gravity in the old man's tone. Understood, Hiruzen told him. Not everything, not the deeper truths about Naruto's parentage, not yet. Some doors still needed to stay closed a while longer, but enough. The hidden compartment in the Forbidden Scroll, Mito Uzumaki's personal journal. The way the seal had opened specifically, deliberately, for Naruto's hand alone. Kakashi sat in silence for a long moment after the explanation finished, processing. Mito Uzumaki's own research, he said finally, slowly. That's what he's been studying. Fragments of it, Hiruzen corrected. Carefully supervised fragments, under Hana Tsurugi's guidance in the archive wing, twice weekly. Nothing beyond foundational theory and a handful of the simplest early designs from her personal notes. And he's already improvising combat applications from those fragments, Kakashi said. In the field. Against a trained enemy. Yes, Hiruzen said, something almost rueful in his tone. That does sound like him, doesn't it? Kakashi let out a slow breath, and for a moment, something behind his visible eye shifted, a memory surfacing, unbidden, of a similarly stubborn, similarly bright-eyed young man he'd once called sensei, sketching foundational seal theory onto scraps of paper between missions, explaining chakra disruption principles to a Kakashi who'd only half listened at the time. Lord Hokage, Kakashi said carefully, there's something I should mention. That paralysis tag Naruto used during the bell test. The underlying seal structure reminded me of something. Something I saw Minato-sensei work with years ago. Hiruzen's expression didn't change, exactly, but something in his posture went very still. Did it? The old Hokage said quietly. It's probably coincidence, Kakashi added quickly, reading something guarded in Hiruzen's silence. Foundational Fuinjutsu theory has certain universal principles. It wouldn't be strange for two students of similar material to land on similar structures independently. No, Hiruzen agreed, a touch too evenly. It wouldn't be strange at all. He didn't elaborate further, and Kakashi, recognizing the deliberate closing of a door, didn't press. Some conversations, he'd learned long ago serving under this man, simply weren't ready to be finished yet. What I need from you, Hiruzen said instead, steering them back to more immediate matters, is your judgment on how to proceed. Naruto clearly isn't going to stop pursuing this path. Wave Country has made that abundantly clear. The question now is whether we continue trying to slow him down, or whether we find him guidance capable of actually keeping pace with his ambition, so that the next time he improvises something under pressure, it doesn't nearly cost him a limb. Kakashi considered this for a long moment. Hana Tsurugi is a fine archivist, he said eventually, but she's not a combat Fuinjutsu specialist. If Naruto's going to keep applying this in the field, he needs someone who understands both the theory and the practical, high-pressure application. Someone who's actually used sealing work in real combat. I agree, Hiruzen said. Fortunately, I believe I know exactly the right person for the job, and as it happens, he's due to arrive back in the village within the week. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you already know exactly where this is heading. And honestly, I think most of you have been waiting for this reveal since Chapter 1, so let's not keep you waiting any longer. Jiraiya of the Sannin arrived back in Konoha 5 days later, striding through the village gates with the loud, boisterous energy of a man who considered subtlety a personal insult. Tall, white-haired, with the distinctive red markings down his face and the massive scroll strapped to his back, he made his way toward the Hokage's tower with the easy confidence of someone who'd walked these streets for decades. He found Hiruzen waiting for him in the office, along with a scroll laid out carefully on the desk that made Jiraiya's eyebrows shoot up the moment he recognized the handwriting. Is that? Jiraiya started. Mito's journal, Hiruzen confirmed. Sit down, Jiraiya. This is going to take a while to explain. Jiraiya sat, and Hiruzen walked him through the same account he'd given Kakashi: the hidden compartment, the keyed seal, the months of careful, supervised study Naruto had undertaken since, and the incident in Wave Country that had proven, in no uncertain terms, that the boy's ambitions had already outpaced his current level of guidance. Jiraiya listened with the particular stillness of a man who'd spent decades training under this exact village's sealing traditions himself, and who understood, better than almost anyone else alive, exactly what kind of doors a genuine talent for Fuinjutsu could open, and exactly how dangerous those same doors could be if handled carelessly. You want me to teach the kid, Jiraiya said finally, once Hiruzen had finished. I want you to evaluate him first, Hiruzen said. See what he's actually capable of, see how deep his aptitude runs. If it's genuine, and I suspect, given everything I've observed, that it is, then yes. I want you to mentor him in Fuinjutsu, alongside whatever other training you deem appropriate. Jiraiya was quiet for a moment, drumming his fingers thoughtfully against the arm of his chair. You know what this means, don't you? He said eventually. If the kid's got real talent for this, and given whose blood runs in him, I wouldn't be shocked. Then teaching him Fuinjutsu isn't just handing him a new skill. It's handing him a piece of his own heritage that nobody's ever properly given him before. I'm aware, Hiruzen said quietly. Which is exactly why I want someone I trust completely handling this, Jiraiya. Someone who'll guide him carefully, and who understands better than most the weight of what he's carrying, in more ways than one. Jiraiya glanced down at Mito's journal again, something contemplative behind his usual boisterous energy. All right, he said finally. Bring the kid in. Let's see what he's actually made of. Naruto had absolutely no idea what to expect when Kakashi told him, the following afternoon, that someone wanted to meet him at the Hokage's tower. Someone Kakashi described only as an old friend of Lord Third's, with some relevant expertise. He definitely didn't expect the tall, wild-haired, loudly dressed man lounging in a chair across from the Hokage's desk, one leg crossed over the other, studying him with an assessing, faintly amused expression the moment he walked in. So this is him, the man said, looking Naruto up and down. Huh. Kid's smaller than I expected. Hey! Naruto said automatically, bristling. Who even are you? Naruto, Hiruzen said, a note of dry amusement in his voice. This is Jiraiya. One of the legendary Sannin, and, as it happens, the man I've decided will be evaluating your Fuinjutsu progress going forward. Naruto's indignation evaporated instantly, replaced by wide-eyed excitement. Wait, the Sannin? Like, the actual Sannin? The guy from the stories? The one and only, Jiraiya said, puffing his chest out slightly with obvious pride. And apparently, according to Sarutobi-sensei here, you've been running around playing amateur Fuinjutsu master with some seriously advanced material. Let's see what you've actually got, kid. Naruto glanced uncertainly at Hiruzen, who nodded his permission, and then, a little nervously, pulled out his practice notebook, a battered, ink-stained collection of scraps he'd been keeping since his very first lessons with Hana, and handed it over. Jiraiya flipped through it slowly, his expression shifting from mild amusement into something considerably more focused as he worked through the pages. He paused on the explosive tag design Naruto had used in Wave Country, studying the crude, shaky brushwork with a critical eye. This the one that took out the ice mirror? He asked. Yeah, Naruto said. How'd you? Kakashi mentioned it, Jiraiya said, not looking up. The theory's sound. Genuinely sound for someone with, 2 months of actual instruction. He glanced at Hiruzen for confirmation, who nodded. 2 months. The execution's rough as hell, and honestly, kid, you're lucky you've still got both your arms after trying this in real combat with this level of polish. But the underlying bones of it are solid. He kept flipping, and then stopped again, this time on a page near the back, one of the earliest, most foundational diagrams from Mito's journal that Naruto had painstakingly copied down weeks earlier, alongside his own messy attempts at replicating the theory. Jiraiya went very quiet. Where did you copy this from? He said, and something in his tone had shifted entirely. No longer the boisterous, teasing energy from a moment ago, but something sharper, more focused. It's from the journal, Naruto said carefully. The one old man Hokage said belonged to Mito Uzumaki. Jiraiya's eyes flicked up to Hiruzen. This is one of her early prototype sketches, he said slowly. For the containment array. The one that eventually became the foundation for. He stopped himself abruptly, glancing at Naruto, then back at Hiruzen, something unspoken passing between the two older men. For the 8 trigram ceiling style, Hiruzen finished quietly. When it became clear Jiraiya wasn't going to say it himself, the room went very still. Naruto looked between the two of them, confused. The what? Hiruzen was quiet for a long moment, weighing, once again, exactly how much truth this particular afternoon could bear. Naruto, he said finally, do you know what technique is responsible for keeping the Nine Tails chakra contained within you? Naruto's breath caught slightly. He'd known, in the vaguest possible sense, since the night of the Forbidden Scroll, that something inside him held the fox at bay. Mizuki had screamed as much at him in that clearing, hadn't he, calling him a monster, a demon in disguise. But nobody had ever actually explained the mechanics of it to him. Not really. No, he admitted quietly. Not really. The 8 trigram ceiling style, Hiruzen said carefully, is the technique your father used to bind the Nine Tails within you the night you were born. It is, without question, one of the most sophisticated pieces of Fuinjutsu ever developed in this village's history, and its foundational principles trace directly back to research pioneered by Mito Uzumaki herself, decades before you were ever born. Naruto sat very still, processing this. The 8 trigram seal. His father. A technique built on Mito's own research, holding the Nine Tails at bay inside his own body every single day of his life without him ever fully understanding it. So, he said slowly, the stuff I've been learning, it's connected to the actual seal. The one keeping the fox locked up inside me. In its origins, yes, Hiruzen said. Which is precisely why I want you learning this properly, Naruto, under careful, expert guidance. Because the seal that keeps you safe, and keeps this village safe, deserves a far deeper understanding than any of us have been giving you credit for wanting. Jiraiya, watching this exchange, set the notebook down carefully on the desk, his earlier sharp focus softening slightly into something more contemplative. Kid, he said. How much do you actually know about your parents? Naruto's throat tightened. Nothing, he admitted. Nobody's ever told me anything. I don't even know their names. Something crossed Jiraiya's face then, a flicker of old grief, quickly suppressed, that Naruto couldn't quite read. That's going to change eventually, Jiraiya said. Not today. Not all at once. But eventually, kid, I promise you, you're going to know exactly who you come from, and it's going to make a hell of a lot more sense why that scroll opened for you and nobody else. He glanced at Hiruzen, some silent understanding passing between them again, and Hiruzen gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, an agreement, perhaps, that the full truth was getting closer, even if it wasn't ready to surface just yet. For now, Jiraiya continued, turning back to Naruto with a considerably lighter tone, clapping his hands together decisively. Let's focus on what actually matters right now, which is making sure you don't blow your own arm off next time you try something reckless in the field. I'm going to be your Fuinjutsu instructor from here on out, kid. Officially. Which means twice a week isn't going to cut it anymore. We're doing this properly. Naruto's eyes lit up, all the heaviness of the previous few minutes momentarily brightening into something closer to pure excitement. Seriously? You're actually gonna teach me? Don't get too excited yet, Jiraiya said, though there was real warmth underneath the gruffness. I'm also going to be teaching you a few other things while I'm at it. Figured a kid with your chakra reserves ought to learn proper summoning technique, among other things. But Fuinjutsu's going to be a serious part of it, and I mean serious. None of this half-baked, crude tag nonsense you've been improvising. We're going to build you a real foundation. Believe it! Naruto practically shouted, grinning wide enough that even Jiraiya, who'd known the boy for all of 10 minutes, found himself grinning back despite his best efforts to maintain a properly serious demeanor. Alright, quick pause here, because I know a lot of you have been waiting specifically for this Jiraiya-Naruto dynamic to kick off, and I promise you, we're going to lean into it hard over the next few chapters. If you're enjoying how this mentor relationship is shaping up, let me know down in the comments. And seriously, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a great time. This series is about to pick up serious momentum. Now, let's talk about what happens next. Because Team 7's about to get nominated for something considerably bigger than another C-rank mission, the Chunin exams. You already know how this part kicks off in the original story. Kakashi, believing his team has grown enough through the trials of Wave Country, nominates all 3 of them for the upcoming Chunin exams, an opportunity most genin teams don't even see until years into their careers. But one Kakashi believes Team 7 has more than earned. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura receive their nomination forms with a mixture of excitement, apprehension, and, in Sasuke's case, quiet, burning determination. We're keeping this beat essentially intact, though there's a small addition worth mentioning. The night before the exam registration, Jiraiya tracks Naruto down at his apartment for what would become the first of many informal, off-the-record training sessions between official lessons. Heard you're taking the Chunin exams, Jiraiya said, letting himself in through Naruto's window with the casual disregard for doors that seemed to define most of his interactions with the world. Yeah, Naruto said, startled but excited. Kakashi-sensei nominated all of us. Good, Jiraiya said, dropping into the single chair in Naruto's cramped apartment, and eyeing the small, cluttered desk covered in practice scrolls and half-finished ink diagrams. That gives us a deadline to work toward. You're not walking into that exam with nothing but a couple crude explosive tags and enthusiasm, kid. We've got a month before the exam actually starts in earnest, assuming you pass the written and the forest portion, and I intend to use every single day of it. What are you gonna teach me? Naruto asked, practically vibrating with anticipation. Fundamentals first, Jiraiya said. Proper chakra-infused ink work. How to actually read Mito's shorthand instead of stumbling through it letter by letter. And, he paused, a considering look crossing his face, since you've apparently got chakra reserves large enough to make most jonin jealous, we're also going to start you on summoning contract theory. Might as well put all that excess chakra to good use instead of just flooding every jutsu you attempt. Summoning? Like, actual summoning? Toads and stuff? Toads specifically, Jiraiya said, with obvious pride. The best summons in the shinobi world, if you asked me, which you should, since I'm the one who signed the contract personally. But that's down the road a bit. Sealing comes first. You've got dangerous instincts, and no foundation to back them up yet. And that's exactly the kind of combination that gets promising shinobi killed early. I'm not about to let that happen to you. Naruto's excitement dimmed slightly at the blunt honesty in that statement, but he nodded seriously, some of the reckless confidence from Wave Country tempered now by the genuine memory of just how close that explosive tag had come to costing him his entire arm. Okay, he said. Teach me right then. I don't want to get lucky next time. I want to actually know what I'm doing. Jiraiya studied him for a long moment, something approving settling behind his usual boisterous exterior. Good answer, kid, he said. All right, chakra paper, tonight, before anything else, let's see exactly what your affinity actually looks like, because that's going to shape everything else we build from here. The following weeks blurred together into a grueling, exhausting routine that made Naruto's earlier archive sessions with Hana look almost gentle by comparison. Team 7's regular training with Kakashi continued during the day, focused on general combat readiness and teamwork exercises in preparation for the exam's later stages. But in the evenings, and during any spare hour Naruto could scrounge, Jiraiya put him through an intensive crash course in proper Fuinjutsu fundamentals. Chakra paper testing revealed Naruto's affinity leaned heavily toward wind, a detail Jiraiya noted with visible interest but set aside for later focus, prioritizing instead the universal, affinity-independent fundamentals of sealing work that would matter regardless of his elemental leanings. Fuinjutsu doesn't care what your affinity is, Jiraiya explained during one particularly grueling session, watching Naruto attempt, and fail, repeatedly, to maintain a steady, controlled chakra output through a practice brush. What matters is precision, patience, and understanding exactly how much chakra a given seal formula requires, down to the smallest fraction. Too little, and the seal just doesn't activate. Too much, and depending on the design, you get anything from a fizzle to an outright detonation. Like what almost happened to my arm, Naruto muttered, wincing at the memory. Exactly like what almost happened to your arm, Jiraiya confirmed, unsympathetic. Which is why we're doing this properly now, instead of you improvising off half-remembered diagrams in the middle of a life-or-death fight. Again. Focus. Chakra output steady, controlled, not too much, not too little. Under Jiraiya's considerably more demanding tutelage, Naruto's progress accelerated dramatically compared to his earlier months of study with Hana, where before he'd been working almost entirely from theory, slowly and painstakingly translating Nito's dense shorthand one fragment at a time. Jiraiya brought decades of practical, combat-tested experience to the table, teaching him not just what the seals did, but why they worked, and more importantly, how to actually apply that understanding under real pressure. By the end of the month, Naruto had produced his first fully successful, properly executed seal from start to finish, a modest chakra suppression tag, nothing flashy, but clean, stable, and correctly proportioned in a way none of his earlier attempts had managed. Not bad, kid, Jiraiya said, examining the finished tag with a critical eye that had, over the past weeks, slowly shifted from skeptical to genuinely impressed. That's actually usable. Took you long enough. You said it'd take months to get even this far. Naruto protested. I said it'd take most people months, Jiraiya corrected. You've got Uzumaki stubbornness working in your favor. Don't let it go to your head though, this is still just the foundation. Mito's real mastery is still a long way off from where you're standing right now. Naruto grinned anyway, tucking the finished tag carefully into his jacket pocket alongside a small, growing collection of properly made, properly tested seals that were beginning, slowly but surely, to replace the crude, dangerous improvisations he'd relied on back in Wave Country. The morning of the Chunin exam arrived with a nervous energy that seemed to hang over the entire village. Genin teams from all over the Land of Fire, and from allied nations besides, converged on Konoha for the event, a triennial tradition that tested not just individual skill, but the collective strength and reputation of entire shinobi villages. Team 7 gathered outside the academy building where the first stage would take place, and you already know the beats here if you've followed the original story closely. Rock Lee's dramatic, love-struck challenge to Sakura, immediately followed by his humiliating defeat at Sasuke's hands in a brief scuffle. The tense first encounter with Team Guy in full, Niji's icy arrogance, Tenten's sharp curiosity, and Lee's earnest, almost painfully sincere devotion to hard work over natural talent. Kabuto Yakushi's suspiciously helpful intervention, breaking up the confrontation and introducing his ninja info cards, giving Team 7 their first real look at exactly how outmatched some of the competition might be. We're keeping all of that intact. It's too foundational to the arc to change. But there's a small addition worth mentioning before the exam itself even begins. While waiting outside the exam hall, Naruto pulled a small, worn notebook from his jacket. Not the practice notebook Jiraiya had been drilling him on for the past month, but a newer one. Its pages considerably more organized than his earlier scattered scraps, filled with careful, if still slightly uneven, diagrams of the fundamental seals he mastered so far. You're really not gonna stop studying, are you? Sakura said, glancing over with a mixture of exasperation and grudging respect. Even right before the exam starts. Can't help it, Naruto admitted, flipping through a few pages. Jiraiya-sensei says the exam's probably gonna test more than just fighting. Figured it couldn't hurt to review. Sasuke, standing nearby with his usual composed silence, glanced over at the notebook with mild curiosity. The same curiosity that had been slowly building since Wave Country, watching Naruto's transformation from reckless prankster into something considerably more deliberate. Whatever that secret training is, Sasuke said, it's actually working. You're different than you were a few months ago. Damn right I am, Naruto said, grinning despite the nervous energy buzzing under his skin. Just wait. I'm gonna show everyone in there exactly how much I've improved. The written portion of the exam unfolded largely as you remember it, Ibiki Marino's intimidating presence at the front of the room, the deliberately, almost impossibly difficult questions designed to test not raw knowledge, but the ability to gather information covertly under pressure without getting caught, and the looming 10th question that promised permanent failure of the shinobi path itself for anyone unwilling to risk everything on it. Naruto, predictably, struggled with the actual written questions. Advanced chakra theory and complex tactical scenarios were never going to be his strength, no matter how much Fuinjutsu training he'd absorbed over the past few months. But something interesting happened during the test that wasn't part of the original story at all. While scanning the room, trying to work out how he might covertly glean answers from nearby test-takers without getting caught outright, Naruto's eyes landed on one of the questions, a dense, technical problem involving chakra flow disruption across a sealed barrier. And for the first time in his entire academic life, Naruto actually recognized what he was looking at. It wasn't a question about combat tactics or advanced ninjutsu theory that he had no foundation for. It was, at its core, a Fuinjutsu problem, chakra disruption patterns, the exact subject Jiraiya had spent the better part of a month drilling into him relentlessly. He stared at the question for a long moment, genuinely startled, before carefully, slowly working through the logic the way Jiraiya had taught him, mapping out the chakra flow, identifying where a disruption pattern would need to intersect the barrier's structure to collapse it cleanly. He wrote out an answer. A real one. Not copied, not guessed, not desperately scrawled based on whatever he could glimpse from a neighboring paper, an actual, worked-through answer based on months of genuine, hard-earned understanding. It was, without exaggeration, the first time in his life Naruto had ever answered a written exam question through pure comprehension rather than sheer stubborn luck. He didn't have time to dwell on the small, quiet triumph of that moment, though. The 10th question loomed. Ibiki's dramatic ultimatum arrived right on schedule, and Naruto's now legendary declaration that he never backed down from a challenge, exam or otherwise, helped tip the entire room's morale in exactly the direction canon requires. The written exam concluded, most of the remaining teams passing through Naruto's unwitting inspiration, and Anko Mitorashi's chaotic, blade-wielding entrance introduced the second stage of the exam waiting for them, the Forest of Death. Quick pause here, because I want to know, do you guys like these small character growth details woven into otherwise familiar scenes, like Naruto actually understanding a written question through his ceiling studies? Let me know down in the comments. It's these little threads that I think really sell the what-if premise instead of just replaying the same story beat for beat. Alright, let's head into the forest. You know this next part well. Training Ground 44, better known as the Forest of Death, a sprawling, nightmarish expanse of towering trees, dangerous wildlife, and lurking dangers that made even seasoned genin nervous. Teams needed to reach the central tower with both a heaven and an earth scroll within 5 days, fighting, scheming, or outright stealing to secure the scrolls they lacked. Team 7 entered with a heaven scroll already in hand, needing only to secure an earth scroll from a rival team to advance. A task that seemed straightforward enough until Orochimaru, disguised as a Kusugakure genin named Team Oboro's mysterious teammate, revealed his true, monstrous intentions. This is where the arc's real danger kicks in, and where our story's divergence starts to matter a great deal. You remember the beats. Orochimaru's overwhelming killing intent paralyzing the entire team with primal, instinctive terror. Sasuke, in a moment of genuine desperation, throwing a kunai that Orochimaru catches effortlessly between his teeth. The illusory, terrifying vision of Sasuke's death that shatters the team's composure entirely. And then the true confrontation, culminating in Orochimaru's curse mark being branded onto Sasuke's neck, and his subsequent unconsciousness. We're keeping the emotional core of this sequence. It's simply too important to the larger Naruto story to alter significantly. Sasuke still receives the curse mark. That thread needs to stay intact for the arc's later payoffs, including the eventual struggle with the Sound 4 and Sasuke's departure from the village further down the road. But the fight leading up to that moment plays out with a crucial difference. When Orochimaru's overwhelming presence first crashed over the clearing, Naruto, like Sasuke and Sakura, found himself momentarily frozen, the sheer, suffocating weight of the Sanin's killing intent locking his muscles in place, cold sweat breaking out across his skin despite the warm forest air. But where the original story has Naruto largely sidelined during this confrontation, mostly reacting rather than acting this time. Something different stirred in him, a flicker of instinct born from months of increasingly disciplined training under Jiraiya's demanding tutelage. He'd learned, slowly and painfully over the past month, to recognize the specific, telltale signature of overwhelming chakra pressure, the same kind of pressure that, in a controlled training exercise, Jiraiya had once deliberately released against him as a teaching tool, forcing Naruto to practice pushing through paralysis rather than freezing entirely. Focus on your own chakra, Jiraiya had told him during that exercise weeks earlier. Killing intent works by overwhelming your own chakra network with foreign pressure. You can't outfight it directly, not at your level. But you can ground yourself against it, anchor your own chakra flow steady, the same way you'd stabilize a seal formula against an unstable input. Naruto had barely managed the technique in a safe, controlled training exercise back then, and doing it now, in the actual, terrifying presence of a genuine S-rank missing nin, was an entirely different challenge altogether. But the muscle memory was there, however fragile, and Naruto forced his trembling hands into the beginning of a familiar seal-stabilizing breathing pattern, focusing every scrap of willpower he had into anchoring his own chakra against the crushing weight bearing down on him. It wasn't a full recovery. Not even close. But it was enough that when Orochimaru's clearing sprang fully into motion, when the false Kusanin lunged towards Sasuke with lethal intent, Naruto found himself capable of movement roughly 2 full seconds before his teammates managed to shake off their own paralysis. 2 seconds isn't much. But in a fight against someone like Orochimaru, 2 seconds is an eternity. Naruto's hand dove into his jacket pocket, closing around one of the properly constructed chakra suppression tags he'd finished under Jiraiya's guidance just days earlier. Nothing capable of actually harming a Sannin, nowhere close, but potentially enough to buy a crucial moment of disruption. He threw it, not at Orochimaru directly, but at the ground directly beneath the man's feet, the tag's chakra disruption field flaring outward in a small, localized burst the instant it made contact with the forest floor. Orochimaru, mid-lunge towards Sasuke, felt the ground beneath his feet shudder with an unexpected, localized disruption in the ambient chakra flow. Nothing that actually harmed him. Nothing that even slowed him more than a fraction of a second, but enough of an unexpected variable that his perfectly calculated attack trajectory shifted, just slightly. Just enough that instead of landing his blow with surgical precision, his hand caught Sasuke's shoulder rather than his intended target. The curse mark still took, the vicious seal searing itself into Sasuke's neck exactly as the original story requires. But the altered trajectory meant Sasuke, rather than collapsing instantly into unconsciousness from a direct, precisely placed strike, remained conscious for several crucial extra seconds, disoriented and in agony, but awake. Orochimaru straightened slowly, turning his attention toward Naruto with a slow, considering smile that made Naruto's blood run cold. Interesting, the Sannin said, voice carrying that same unsettling, sibilant quality that had haunted genin nightmares for generations. A disruption tag. Improvised, and crude, but functional, and quick enough to actually alter my strike. His pale, slitted eyes studied Naruto with unnerving intensity. Tell me, little Uzumaki, where did a dead last genin learn Fuinjutsu competent enough to interfere with my technique, even marginally? Naruto, chakra network still ringing from the effort of anchoring himself against the killing intent, forced himself to stand fully upright, refusing to let the fear show any more than absolutely necessary. Wouldn't you like to know, he said, with considerably more bravado than he actually felt. Orochimaru's smile widened, something genuinely delighted flickering behind the unsettling expression. Oh, I would, he said softly. I would indeed. He didn't press further though, not now, not with his primary objective already accomplished and Sasuke's curse mark successfully delivered. Instead, he simply turned, offering one last, lingering glance toward Naruto that carried far more weight than any words could have, before disappearing into the surrounding trees in a swirl of shifting, unnatural chakra, leaving the team battered, shaken, and one member down. The aftermath played out largely as you remember, Sakura's desperate, tearful vigil protecting her unconscious teammates, the encounter with the sound genin sent to finish the job Orochimaru had started, and Rock Lee's dramatic, timely intervention that saves the team from further disaster. Sasuke, waking briefly in a haze of curse mark-induced power, brutally overwhelms the remaining threat before Sakura's desperate plea finally breaks through to him, pulling him back from the edge of whatever dark power the mark had begun offering him. Team 7, battered but alive, eventually secures their needed scroll and reaches the central tower well within the exam's time limit, the whole ordeal leaving all three of them profoundly shaken in ways that would ripple forward through the following weeks. But there's a small, quiet scene worth including here, one that happens shortly after the team's arrival at the tower. While Sasuke rests in the tower's small infirmary and Sakura keeps anxious watch nearby, Naruto sat alone in a corner of the tower's waiting area, staring down at his own hands, still faintly trembling from the aftereffects of both the encounter with Orochimaru and the desperate battle that followed. He pulled out his notebook, flipping to the page containing the chakra suppression tag design, studying it with a mixture of pride and unease. It had worked. Genuinely worked, against an actual Sannin, buying just enough of a disruption to alter the trajectory of an attack that would otherwise have knocked Sasuke out cold instantly. But it also hadn't been enough. Not nearly enough. Sasuke still bore that vicious mark on his neck, still carried whatever corrupted power Orochimaru had planted inside him like a seed waiting to bloom. Naruto's disruption tag had bought seconds, not victory. You alright? Naruto glanced up to find Kakashi standing nearby, having arrived at the tower shortly after the team, his visible eye studying Naruto with quiet concern. I used one of the tags, Naruto admitted quietly, against him. Against Orochimaru. Kakashi's expression sharpened slightly. I heard. Sakura mentioned it, in her report just now. He was quiet for a moment, considering his next words carefully. It's a good thing you did, Naruto. It likely saved Sasuke from a far more precisely delivered strike. But it wasn't enough, Naruto finished, voice tight with frustration. He still got the mark on him anyway. I couldn't actually stop it. No, Kakashi agreed gently. You couldn't. Not against someone at Orochimaru's level, not yet, and probably not for a long while still. But Naruto, you altered the outcome of an attack from one of the three legendary Sannin, using a seal you built yourself, under real pressure, in a fight that would have overwhelmed most Chunin outright. That's not nothing. That's not nothing at all. Naruto was quiet for a long moment, absorbing that. I want to be good enough, he said finally, quietly, that next time, it is enough. That next time, nobody I care about gets hurt because I was too slow, or too weak, or didn't know the right seal at the right second. Kakashi studied him for a long moment, something quietly proud settling behind his usual lazy demeanor. Then keep training the way you have been, he said. Jiraiya-sama clearly knows what he's doing with you. Just, don't let today make you reckless, Naruto. Orochimaru is dangerous precisely because he understands exactly how far someone's ambition can push them past their actual limits. Don't let your grief over what happened today become the thing that gets you hurt tomorrow. Naruto nodded slowly, tucking his notebook back into his jacket, the weight of the day's events settling heavily but not crushingly across his shoulders. Alright, before we move into the preliminary rounds, let's take a quick breather. If you're enjoying this slightly more active role for Naruto during the Forest of Death sequence, let me know down in the comments. I wanted this fight to matter, to show real, hard-earned growth without ever making Naruto capable of actually standing toe-to-toe with a Sannin, because that would break the entire believability of this story's power scaling. Growth has to be earned in small, meaningful increments, not sudden leaps. Alright, let's get to the preliminary matches. Once enough teams had gathered at the tower, the third Hokage himself, along with the assembled proctors, announced the results of the second stage and the transition into a preliminary round, a necessary addition due to the unusually high number of teams that had managed to survive the forest's dangers this particular year, requiring a filtering round before the main tournament could proceed. You remember the format. One-on-one matches, displayed via an electronic board that randomly selected each pairing. Single elimination, immediate advancement to the final tournament for the winners. The matches unfold largely as you'd expect from the original story. Sasuke, still recovering from the curse mark's lingering effects, faces off against Yoroya, ultimately overcoming his opponent's chakra-draining technique through sheer grit and a desperate, curse mark-fueled surge of speed that leaves Kakashi deeply concerned about the mark's growing influence. Shino defeats Kankuro's puppet in the same lightning displays of destruction insects and clever tactical maneuvering. Shikamaru wins through his usual lazy brilliance against Kintsuchi. Sakura and Ino fight to a genuinely emotional draw that resolves their old friendship's tangled complications. Rock Lee's brutal defeat of Kiba's usual paired taijutsu assault continues to display his relentless dedication to hard work over natural talent. And then, of course, comes the fight everyone watching this channel has probably been waiting for since Chapter 1, Naruto Uzumaki vs. Kiba Inuzuka. The electronic board flickered through its randomized selection before finally settling on the two names, and Naruto grinned wide, cracking his knuckles as he made his way down to the arena floor. Kiba and Akamaru already waiting for him with matching, overconfident smirks. "This'll be quick," Kiba said, Akamaru barking in cheerful agreement from atop his head. "No offense, Naruto, but you're still the dead last, no matter how you did in the forest." "Dead last, huh?" Naruto said, settling into a loose combat stance, one hand resting casually near his jacket pocket where a small collection of properly constructed tags waited. "Guess you'll just have to find out for yourself." The fight that followed largely mirrors the shape of the original confrontation. Kiba's aggressive, fast-paced taijutsu assault backed by Akamaru's coordinated attacks, Naruto's initial struggles against the pair's combined speed and coordination, and the eventual reveal of Kiba's Gutsuga technique, a devastating spinning assault that very nearly overwhelms Naruto in the fight's opening minutes. But where the original story has Naruto rely almost entirely on shadow clones and a clever bit of scent-based trickery to secure his eventual victory, this time, his growing Fuinjutsu skill plays a considerably more direct role in the fight's conclusion. Cornered and battered after Kiba's initial assault, Naruto, thinking fast, the way his months of training had slowly conditioned him to do under pressure, created a handful of shadow clones to scatter and distract Kiba's enhanced tracking senses, buying himself just enough breathing room to slap a hastily prepared scent disruption tag onto his own jacket sleeve. It was a small, almost experimental design, something Naruto had cobbled together during a late-night training session with Jiraiya just weeks earlier, intended originally as a stealth tool rather than a combat technique. A seal designed to mask and confuse a target's own chakra and scent signature, throwing off tracking-based senses. Kiba and Akamaru's enhanced noses, thoroughly confused by the sudden, disorienting scent disruption radiating from Naruto's sleeve, lost their precise lock on his position for several crucial seconds, more than enough time for Naruto's remaining shadow clones to coordinate a final, decisive assault that finally knocked both Kiba and his loyal partner out of the fight for good. The crowd's reaction mirrored the confusion and grudging respect that had followed Naruto throughout this entire journey. Murmurs rippling through the assembled shinobi and dignitaries at the unexpected, tactical sophistication on display from a genin most of them had already written off entirely. Up in the viewing gallery, Jiraiya, watching from a shadowed corner alongside Kakashi, allowed himself a small, proud smile. "That's my design he used," Jiraiya said quietly. The scent disruption tag. Told him it was mostly theoretical, honestly. Didn't expect him to actually pull it off in real combat this soon. "He's been surprising all of us lately," Kakashi said, equally quiet, watching Naruto grin and pump his fist triumphantly down on the arena floor below. "Whatever you're teaching him, Jiraiya-sama, it's working faster than any of us anticipated." "Uzumaki stubbornness," Jiraiya said, something almost wistful in his tone. "Runs deep in that family. Deeper than most people realize." The preliminary round concluded with the remaining matches playing out largely as you'd expect. Niji's cold, methodical dismantling of Hinata's confidence in a fight that leaves the quiet, kind-hearted Hyuga heiress devastated and battered, prompting Naruto's furious, heartfelt outburst in her defense that plants the emotional seeds for their later, deeper connection. Niji advances. Gaara's terrifying, one-sided demolition of Rock Lee's teammate leaves the arena in stunned silence at the sheer, casual brutality on display, foreshadowing the trials still waiting in the tournament's final stage. 8 fighters remain, advancing to the main tournament: Sasuke, Naruto, Niji, Shino, Shikamaru, Temari, Dosu, and Gaara. A full month is granted before the final tournament begins, giving each competitor time to prepare for whatever challenges await. As the survivors filed out of the tower, Jiraiya caught Naruto by the shoulder, pulling him aside with an uncharacteristically serious expression. You did good today, kid, he said. Genuinely good. But that fight against Kiba, and what you tried against Orochimaru in the forest, both of those showed me you've still got a long way to go before your instincts catch up to your actual skill level. A month isn't much time, but it's enough, if we use every single day of it properly. Naruto's exhaustion from the fight gave way instantly to renewed determination, the familiar fire returning to his eyes. Then let's use it, he said. Teach me everything you've got, Jiraiya-sensei. I'm not gonna let what happened to Sasuke happen to anyone else I care about. Not again. Jiraiya studied him for a long moment, something proud and faintly sorrowful mixing behind his usual boisterous exterior, the look of a man who recognized, better than almost anyone else alive, exactly how much weight a single month of training could carry, and exactly how much still remained unspoken about the boy standing in front of him. All right, kid, he said finally. Then let's get to work. We've got a month to turn you into someone this whole village is going to remember for a lot longer than just this exam.